Dr. William Harvey Hunter. This is an interview with Dr. William Harvey Hunter, who was president of the South Carolina Medical Association. This interview is being conducted by Charles Bryan on October 25, 1991 in Clemson, South Carolina. Bill, tell me where you were born and who were your parents. Tell me a little bit about your family of origin.
Well, that's something I've always been kind of interested in, you know. I was born in Anderson. Actually, my mother and father were both from Greenville County, but my father was in business in Anderson, so I was born there. I was one of 72 babies born in Anderson Memorial Hospital in 1923, September the 13th, 1923. My father was Samuel Eugene Hunter, and my mother was Ruth McCarroll Hunter. My father was from up in the dark corners of South Carolina. He was raised by his great-grandfather, my great-grandfather, Tom Davis. They were very interesting people. My father was a cousin to Samuel Clemens. That was one of his claims to fame. And my mother was from there in northern Greenville County, the McCarrolls and the Bolins. And she was descended from William Randolph up there at Turkey Island in Virginia. And she was cousins to, she had a lot of Huguenot cousins, cousin to Thomas Jefferson and people like that. She was always reminding me of that sort of thing.
Where did you grow up?
Well, actually, I grew up in Anderson up through puberty, really. And then I moved to Greenville, finished Greenville High School. Growing up was a very interesting and somewhat traumatic thing for me. Probably I was somewhat dyslexic. Being somewhat ambidextrous, and my early school years were a trial for me, and I'm sure we didn't have social promotion back in those days, Charlie. So I think the only reason I was ever promoted from one grade to another in the early years there was none of the school teachers wanted to face my mother for another year. And then, fortunately, as some of these dyslexics do, if you can use both sides of your brain along and you get to around to puberty, well, you can kind of put it all together and you can do pretty well.
It's well known that you went to Clemson where you played on the football team. Tell me a little bit about your undergraduate education and your experience at Clemson, and also a little bit about how you decided to become a doctor.
Oh, that's an interesting story. I don't know if you have time for it now, but anyway, I went to Clemson on an athletic grant and aid, and while there I participated on the football and the boxing and the track teams. And also I was the critic of the Calhoun Forensic Society, which was one of the things that interested me much in those days. Clemson has always meant a great deal to me. And in fact, my Huguenot great-uncle was the contractor that built the original buildings at Clemson. So it's been kind of Clemson is kind of a family tradition, you know.
How did you decide to become a doctor?
Well, I went to Clemson, and the first 2 years I was there, I studied electrical engineering. And then the war came along, World War II, right there, and I went into aviation. I went into naval aviation as a naval aviation cadet, and later, as I got my wings, I became a Marine officer and pilot. We flew off carriers. I was fortunate to there at the end of the war to be with VMS 214, the old Black Sheep Squadron. And prior to that, I'd flown torpedo bombers some off carriers. I got interested in medicine, changed from electrical engineering. During the war, what happened was, just as I was getting ready to get my wings, initially, I was washed out due to some trouble with an eardrum. And anyway, it seems that the doctor made an error And so in about 5 months, I ended back up getting ready to get my wings again. And they thought I needed refreshment. And in getting this refreshment, they didn't know what to do with me. They had never had a naval aviation cadet come back after being washed out. So they decided to send me to flight surgeon school. And I went over to flight surgeon school, which takes you quickly through all the different airplanes. And these were all young doctors just getting out of med school. And so I was a month in class with them. And I didn't think I had to go to the classes on aviation medicine, so I missed the first one. And the commander of the school got so damn mad about me missing. He said he's going to wash me out again if I didn't attend the aviation medicine classes, and where I was spending half the time in aviation medicine, half the time flying these various planes. So I had to go to it. I had to take the test. In fact, my grade on the test was pretty good. I just listened to what they were saying and wrote down the answers. And I passed along with the flight surgeons. So I thought, well, maybe I could study medicine after all. It was kind of a catch-22 affair, you know. It's how it happens in the service sometimes.
That is really an interesting story. What did the phrase washed out mean again?
Well, when you were washed out of aviation, that was the lowest point that any aviation cadet could ever have. You washed out for either failing in your flying or failing on your health, physicals. And that meant you were thrown out of aviation, that you could no longer pursue your wings and all. And I guess that at that time, the only person who had ever been washed out of naval aviation and then got back in was myself. It was just that they did it, but the interesting thing was, I'm sure that it was probably my mother who did it. My mother always, you know, she had a lot of influence on me, and I told her how disappointed I was at being washed out and how unjust it was, because it turned out that I didn't have a hole in my eardrum, just a scar. So she got in touch with these two prominent senators we had in South Carolina at the time, and asked him what was they trying to do to her little boy. And so I think that's what got me back into aviation, more so than the fact that the doctors had made the mistake on the eardrum.
You had some experience, didn't you, of landing airplanes on aircraft carriers. What was that like?
Well, that was very interesting, you know. I've flown several different types of planes off aircraft carriers during World War II and immediately after. We trained for this on an old lake steamer up on Lake Michigan, and flew Corsairs. Mostly of what I flew, I've had about 2 crashes on carriers, one with a torpedo bomber, and one with a F-4U Corsair, the old bent wing bird. It was very interesting flying, and we had to be. You had to do that. I think you had to be kind of young and eager, which, you know, we consider ourselves in those days when we were so young in that part of the war. We called ourselves teenage killers.
Then after your experience in World War II, you went back to Clemson.
Back to Clemson, changed my major to pre-medicine.
Did you continue to play football?
Yes, I continued to play football and participate in athletics. I never was very good, you know. I made the first team most of the time, but I never was a great athlete, but I was an enthusiastic athlete.
You had some good teams back then, didn't you?
Yes, we did. We had some very good teams, and we had some very outstanding athletes, people that I was associated with. The interest as I look back on those teams, so many of the people on the teams that I played with were real scholars, you know, were real good students. And I look at what they've accomplished in life since then, and they've all, some of them, you know, executive director of American Express, the chief executive officer of some of the largest mills in the country, IBM executives. These are all football players that I played with. Even the fellow that one of the biggest used car dealers in the South, he was another guard with us. A sheriff, one of the slowest people on the team and the biggest guy. turned out to be a sheriff of a little county.
You played both ways as a guard, is that right?
That's right. We played both ways back in there, and I remember playing for the in the Shrine Bowl in high school football in Charlotte, and we'd gone. The tiredest I've ever been on an athletic field was we were playing North Carolina in South Carolina in the Shrine Bowl, and we, instead of the 12-minute quarters, we'd gone to 15-minute quarters like in college, but the coach for some reason had left me in there all except the last 2 minutes of the game, and I'd played it both ways, and I was really, that's the tiredest I've ever been in all my athletic career.
Mm. Tell me something about your experience at the Medical College of South Carolina. You went to medical college right after finishing Clemson, I believe, and tell me something about the professors who had an influence on you.
Well, my medical college days were just great days, you know. I went to school. I was married to Jane at the time, and as I still am married to Jane, and she was a Delta Airlines stewardess. She was Jane Gardner from over in Darlington County. Her family had hotels down at Myrtle Beach and lived up in Darlington during the winter months, and I'd met her down at Myrtle Beach while I was a lifeguard down there between my freshman and sophomore year at college, before I went into the service. Anyway, the time I went to med school, Jane and I were married and had 2 children. And so we had our hands full on it. Jane was teaching school, and I was spending a lot of time over at med school. Med school, after getting over that first real tough year, med school was really some of the most enjoyable years that I've ever done. I was fortunate to get the student pathology fellowship in our class. They gave one to a class, and so I worked in pathology as a part-time for a couple of years there, my last 2 years, and that was such good training and good enthusiasm, working with people like Dr. Pratt Thomas, who was just a superior man, superior teacher. And Dr. Bob Walton there in pharmacology was a marked influence on me through med school. Also, our senior year at med school, they always had an intern to ride the ambulance there at Charleston, at Roper Hospital, which was part of the medical college. And they didn't have enough interns that year, so they hired 2 senior students, and I was one of them. I made $100 a month, and I would be on ambulance call every other 24 hours. And so that deserves a book, some of the things that happened on ambulance call in Charleston. I could go on and on about that, but med school to me was one of the best times, the most enjoyable times that I've ever had, you know, except maybe for now.
Were you a prosector in pathology? Did you do autopsies?
I did autopsies, and I remember Dr. Pratt Thomas, who was head of pathology and later president of the medical college. He came up here to Clemson one night and to make a little talk to the alumni, and we always call it PT. PT, we'd all had a couple of drinks, and we were walking out of the lecture room that night, and suddenly PT turned on me with really a bit upset, and he said, "Bill Hunter, what in the hell are you doing up here doing this? You're supposed to be a pathologist." And but I did help do the autopsies, and when I interned at the Greenville General Hospital, the medical examiner there learned of my experience, and so for a year there, I did all the autopsies for the Greenville County medical examiner. So I did a lot of that, and I reworked and relabeled the entire gross lab there in Department of Pathology. I suppose my printing and directions on the different specimens in all the gross specimens that they are at Charleston are still extant. It's still right there. I remember the first heart that was ever operated on mitral stenosis. I think it was done on an Ohio woman. It was done in Charleston. And the heart of her heart is there in that lab, as is the heart of the doctor who operated on her, who had mitral stenosis too.
That was a tragic story, as I recall, about him going up to Hopkins to be instructed in how to do the operation.
Right. And you know, his chief resident was Manly Stallworth, who was a Clemson man and one of the cadet colonels while I was a lowly cadet at Clemson. And Manly was being trained by this man at this time, hopefully to get Manly to be able to do it. Manly turned out to be a fine, but his mentor died, a fine surgeon, but his mentor died before he really got to the point of it, was this mitral stenosis.
How did you choose a particular field of medicine, in your case, family practice? Tell me something about your internship and how you decided to come back to Clemson to do family practice.
Well, I'd always wanted to come back and live in Clemson. I'd lived all my life in Seneca, Anderson, and Greenville. And this little town is right in the middle of these. I'm within 25 miles or so of where I've lived all my life, right here at Clemson. And it's right where I wanted to be. My family and my friends were here, and I just wanted to be in this area.
So it's just natural for you to come back to Clemson and do family practice?
Yes, it was. Family practice, you know, when I went to med school, I decided to become a specialist, and so as I started my rotation in my junior year, I think I started off in orthopedics, and I decided that that's what I was going to be as an orthopedist. My next rotation was obstetrics, and then I changed my mind. I knew I was going to be an obstetrician. The next one was medicine, and I dropped all that. I was going to be an internist. I knew this is what I wanted to do. Damn it, every rotation I went through, that's what I wanted to do, you know. I just liked it all so much that I thought the only thing to do is general practice. So I got involved in just doing general medicine here in Clemson, and I've never regretted it. I really like doing what I'm doing, the variety in it, and the interest in it, and the people in it. Man, I'd hate to be doing nothing but catching babies or nothing but fixing broken bones. You know, just one. I think I'd always do this. If I had to go over again right now, I'd do it the same way. Maybe internal medicine, which would be roughly the same kind of specialty of family medicine. I've taken my family medicine boards on 3 occasions, and one time making it in the 95th percentile. And this is what I like doing. I was very interested in family practice as a specialty, and I have served on that national board of directors, and I've served as that Washington consultant. It was during these years as Washington consultant that I had to do some walking of the halls of Congress and get the funding and approval of family practice grants throughout the nation, and all these. This is when we got all the federal money for the family practice programs throughout the country. Fortunately, I was asked to serve at about this time at the National Institutes of Health on their National Advisory Council on Health Professions Education. So I spent 4 years at that, and this was deciding when and where and what schools to grant various things to. Went well over $1 billion. This I think, if I indeed have a contribution of any sort, this might well be one of my contributions. That this is a time that we increased. It was a purpose of our council. There's 16 of us. It was a purpose of our council to increase the numbers of physicians, and we did so by 50%. And it was our purpose to increase the number of females in medicine and minorities in medicine. And we more than doubled, over 100% on this. We increased and worked at this in various ways, various grants, and all that work up at Washington it was most rewarding to me, one of the most rewarding things I've done.
So you were one of these people who liked everything and decided to be a generalist, and then you helped promote general medicine, family practice, and you feel that that was one of your major contributions. Tell me, you once described some of the difficulties and joys of getting started in practice in a very memorable essay you wrote for the Journal of the American Medical Association entitled Daddy. Tell me, in the midst of this, do you feel like you contributed to making it easier for the others coming along after you to get started in practice?
Oh, well, I hope so. The MUSC asked me to write an editorial for them for their cover of this January's issue of the Alumni News, and I wrote in this vein. And you know, medicine, the practice of medicine and the field of medicine is the most wonderful. There's nothing else that compares with it. You know, this is the most wonderful thing a person, man or woman, can become involved in. The working with people and being able to help them in one way or another. And I always try to remind myself that we don't ever really save lives. We just prolong life a bit, and we keep a person from pain if we can. And but this, you get to see so many different people and different things. It's always interesting. It's always interesting. And there's always a possibility of a physician. You know, you can do anything, anywhere. You're probably the only person that you, Charlie Bryan, could go into Zaire in Africa, deepest Africa, or you could go to Norway, or you could take a boat to Tokyo, and your skill is needed. It can be used anywhere in the world. Nobody else can say that. No businessman, no lawyer or an attorney, no politician, no one else in the world can say that they can be used anywhere in this world, nearly at any time, as you, Charlie Bryan, could be, you know. You have the knowledge and the ability to do this. No other profession can say this. And there's something, you know, that you just love medicine, that you think of all this, and it's just part of you.
You've already told us about who you married. Tell us something about Jane and also about your family.
Well, my wife Jane is a very interesting person. I first saw her, I was sitting on a lifeguard chair, and I'd heard about her. She came walking down the beach in this black bathing suit, the first time I ever saw her. She had this burnt blonde hair hanging down to a gluteal crease, and it took my breath. I'll tell you, she took my breath, and she immediately told me she was going out on the pier in my guard area and dive off the end of the pier. And I said, no, you can't do that. That's against the law. I'm not going to permit that. I'll have you arrested. And so we got into a real confrontation right off the bat. Well, so we stood around and talked, and then lunchtime came, and I took my sign down and went into the hotel. And I was in the hotel there having a milkshake or something, and somebody came running in and said, some woman has just dived off the end of the pier. There's this long pier out there, and I didn't know how good a swimmer she was. I didn't know she was an outstanding swimmer. She's outstanding in everything she does. She was on President Reagan's educational panel, did outstanding work on that. Perhaps it made some changes or testimony to the Senate, make some changes that may influence. I see they're still influencing, still moving. She first initiated this stuff on his educational panel. There in the swimming, I thought later that day, this is such a cute girl, I can't have her arrested, but she came swimming in right there from the end of the pier, so I say, well, let's go swimming tomorrow together. So I thought, what I'm going to do with this woman is I'm going to swim out toward Africa with her. And I was a lifeguard, you see, the big, strong Clemson football player lifeguard. She was 5'1", and she weighed 103 pounds. But that 103 pounds was really put together real nice. And so we go out swimming, and I thought, I'm going to take her out so damn far that I'm going to have to pull in, and I'm going to be a hero, see. So I get her out there, and I look back at the coastline, and it's just way down on the horizon, and I'm getting tired. and she's swimming around in a circle around me, talking the whole time, just talking, you know. And I'm treading water, trying to catch my breath. And I thought, so I finally said, I noticed that she's not having any trouble, so I'm going to have to go back in. So I said, well, maybe I should go take you back in. She looked at me as a puzzle, and she kept swimming around me as I was treading water. And so we go back in. I like not to have made it. She jumped out of the waves and ran up on the shore, laughing and talking. And I just sat there in the waves for a while because my legs wouldn't hold me up. I was so tired. And she came out there and she said, are you all right? And I said, of course I'm all right. I'm just playing in the breakers a bit. So that's the kind of woman she is. And we've had 5 children, Sam and Harvey, Gwen, our daughter Gwen, who's married to Dr. James Hanahan over in, James Ross Hanahan over in Seneca. He is chief of staff over there, my own physician, a real fine person. And my son Harvey, who's in textile management, married to No Ray, and has his own William Harvey Hunter III, and a new baby Trevor Shoemate Hunter, named after the last Shoemate Huguenots that we were related to. And then my son Matt, who's married to Pamela, and my son Dr. John Mark Hunter, who is a professor down in Louisiana, and he's married and he's married to Melissa from Maryland, who's a brilliant woman, and they have a little girl, Julia, and they have another one on the way. So we have a lot of Hunters going out, Hunters and Hanahans, and like James Ross III, Carson. We got a William Hunter Hanahan who's really something.
So how many grandchildren do you have?
J.J. Hanahan. 7 or 8. We've got another one on the way too. Another one.
Getting hard to keep track.
It's getting hard to keep track.
Bill, how did you happen to get involved in organized medicine? Tell me a little bit about your early experiences in organized medicine. You were a successful practitioner here in Clemson. How did you get involved in the politics of medicine?
Well, some of the doctors in Anderson County approached me and asked me if I would represent Anderson County as a delegate to the state medical convention. And I had not thought much about it at that time, but I was rather young, and they said, we want to send somebody young down there. So I went down and became involved in that, and I must say that the people that I've been involved with in the state medical associations of political affairs have really been outstanding people, you know, like Halsted Stone and Watus Tanner, and people, these are superior men and physicians. And I've met so many good people. Like one of the best things I've been involved in medicine is getting on the editorial board, working with you, Charlie Brown. And it's been a real reward to me. Also, this led to other things on the national level, and it led to me being chairman of education for physicians in South Carolina for 4 years under the original medical program, which was my first statewide activities and work. And then from then on, I became executive on the executive committee of the State Board of Health, which was very rewarding and instructive. And all those good people that worked in medicine back through those years, Tucker Weston, John Hawk, and now young John Hawk, all these people, outstanding good people, contributing a lot to society as well as their profession.
How did you find the time to do this, to be involved in so many organizations when you had a busy solo practice in Clemson?
Well, we always had good doctors, and we would cover here. I was, I don't know if I'm a little hyperactive or perhaps unipolar cyclothymic, manic, or what. But I've never been involved not dealing with reality, but I've always had a lot of energy for one reason or another.
You've had a high energy level.
High energy level, and I still feel like it's a great waste of time to, when my wife comes in and goes to bed at 9 o'clock every night, that gives me 3 hours to do something, you know. And I'm not going just to sit, I'm going to read, I'm going to write, something of that sort. One of my pleasures now is writing, not only pleasure, but I'm on that payroll with the Independent Mail, and I write a Sunday column for them once a week. This is of interest to me, and I'm still writing for various magazines over the country, usually on assignment.
I've read many of your articles, which are, as always, quite entertaining. Before you became elected president of the State Medical Association, the SCMA, what were some of the major issues facing medicine, and how did you feel about them? Tell me something about your early experience and what the issues were that made involvement worthwhile.
Well, medicine is an individual thing. It's an individual physician, and this is why, one of the reasons I love it so. It's an individual, and it's your individual responsibility to succeed or to fail. It's up to you to do this. And when you get a third party into this, it really muddies what was a clear mountain stream at one time. And so my concern has always been to try to keep government, insurance, state government, national government, businesses, to keep them from getting in between the physician and his patient. Because as long as it's a one-on-one relationship, you're not going to have much trouble. You're not going to have the trouble of economics. You're not going to have the trouble of getting care, as long as it's a one-on-one thing. And this is what I have tried to accomplish. And like, for instance, the regional medical program, that was the first federal law passed under Lyndon Johnson, a fairly poor excuse for a president, that had the federal government involved with doctors at the state level. In most states in the United States.
We are continuing an interview of Dr. William Harvey Hunter on October 25, 1991, a second tape, and we were talking about Dr. Hunter's involvement with the regional medical program. Bill, would you like to continue?
Yes, I think our success in South Carolina had to do with an approach that we must mingle such a thing with the private practice of medicine. Now, we had some trouble in Washington. They didn't. I insisted on putting the Education Committee, the South Carolina Medical Association, on as the committee for continuing education of the state. It was just a natural amalgamation of the two items. Well, the government didn't much like this, but, you know, they put on their pants the same way we do, and I just argued with them and fought with them over this thing, and we continued in that vein, and consequently, we ended up with a lot of good results from the regional medical program by amalgamating private medicine and this government effort. The government didn't end up in control of it. They resented it a bit, and we had some trouble with them, but we worked that out all right. And, you know, it's during this time that I got interested in helping form a second political party in South Carolina. South Carolina had always had one political party, and the Democrat, and so some of us got together, and they called us the Four Horsemen. It was Arthur Avenel in Charleston, Drake Edens in Columbia, Tommy Rowe in Greenville, and myself. The four of us went out and formed the South Carolina Republican Party as it's known today. And it was during this time that I was delegate to national conventions on several occasions and appeared before the platform committee of 3 different national platform committees of the Republican Party on behalf of private medicine and spoke on behalf of private medicine in that capacity, which I think it was of some help to organize medicine as such.
When you were elected president of the State Medical Association, what were some of the major issues and themes? What were the conflicts in medicine and the concerns then? You've told us earlier about the concerns you had about relationships between patients, doctors, and third parties. What were some of the major issues, and what do you feel were some of the major accomplishments during your year as president?
Well, we had an ongoing thing of this thing of government and medicine, and so this was a constant and ongoing problem that we worked with. Also, it was important to me that we involve as many people, as many physicians in private practice in the State Medical Association, and this is what we did. We accomplished this to a great extent. Also, I've always been interested in literature and writing, and at the time I was serving as grants chairman for the Roe Foundation in South Carolina, and I prevailed upon them to make a grant to the Journal of the South Carolina Medical Association, now for the best article written every year. And this is because we have some outstanding people in history that have accomplished a lot. You know, the TUR machine was first done here in South Carolina, and that sort of thing. And about the same time, we got Dr. Charles Bryan as our editor of the Journal of the South Carolina Medical Association. And I must say, while we'd always had a journal, that we were it was not at its best at about this time. And I think the main thing that helped our journal to the point that it's a good journal today is that we acquired the services of Dr. Charles Bryan as editor at that time. And also during that time, my small contribution was arranging for this grant that would several $1,000s that would give the interest of a few $1,000s each year to the best article written in the journal. And I thought this was a worthwhile effort during my term as president. My one failure in my term as president, well, let me say, I asked in finishing up my term that the council, the governing council, consider putting a woman and a younger resident type physician on our governing council. They didn't see fit to do that at the time, but I think since then that this has occurred, and of course that was the first time it had been brought up in South Carolina. But this is the sort of thing that's bringing all the physicians in the state together. My one real failure in the South Carolina as president was with the seal of the state. It is my opinion that the date on the seal is in marked error, and this seal should really date back to the beginning of the first South Carolina Medical Association that was mounted to the Charleston County Medical Association. That was where the only place they had doctors originally. So this date is not 1841 or whatever it is on there, but it actually goes back into the 1700s, because that medical society at that time did have doctors in the back country, and it was the only state medical association. And my friend and colleague who opposed me on this is none other than editor Dr. Charles Bryan, and he got his way about this, but I'm telling Charlie right now that I'm going to work toward changing that date on the seal, and if they don't change it, maybe at least we can put 2 dates on the seal.
Well, that's a minor point with me. I think that most would consider that to be a small failing during your presidency. I certainly appreciate your comments, and frankly, if it's still a strong issue, I would be on record here on camera as being quite amenable to the concept of a couple of dates I know there's some precedent for that. The seal of the New England Journal of Medicine, for example, has several dates as it changed name. So I think that that's certainly something that could be renegotiated.
Well, then I have no failures to mention.
Since your years as president of the State Medical Association, in that honor, what have been your major activities, both in the SCMA and in other areas? You've already touched on some of these, of course.
Well, of course, I mentioned my newspaper writing and writing for various publications over the country, and I've enjoyed that very much. One thing I did was to gather together, as you know, Clemson University does not have a medical school, but we were very proud for a long period of time with the very good academic record of Clemson students at the Medical University of South Carolina. And we tended to brag about how well they'd done down there. But we have a lot of Clemson alumni who are physicians. So about the time I finished being president, I organized the Clemson Alumni Physician Society, CAPS, acronym CAPS, which is a meeting that a society that meets in Clemson once a year, and we have a very excellent medical program at that meeting.
During your years of involvement with the leadership of the SCMA, you've already told us about some of the physicians that were inspiring to you and that you felt were especially influential, such as Wadis Tanner and Halsted Stone and John Hawk. Is there anything that you'd like to say about these or any of the other personalities of your time?
Oh, well, you know, have you got enough tape for 3 days? I'll tell you what, there's something about South Carolinians that are involved at this level that I could just, people like Vince Mosley. Vince Mosley deserves a book written on him. Vince and I worked together for so long, so many years. What an interesting character he was, and so bright, and such a good physician. And all of these people, and of course John Hawk, an outstanding, raised in China among missionaries, outstanding cancer surgeon, and Gavin Appleby, who has recently died. This is a very bright man. He was the brightest man in our medical school class, for instance. I just hate to think about our next reunion without Gavin there. A lot of interesting, a lot of good and interesting people.
Would you like to comment on the personalities of other persons with whom you dealt? You've already mentioned that you helped to form the State Republican Party and certainly knew many of the political figures of your times. Would you like to comment on some of the political figures, other personalities of the times?
Oh yeah, well I've met and worked with a lot of these people. I knew President Nixon somewhat, and he appointed me to that work at the National Institutes of Health. President Nixon, you know, I always look at these people and think, how would I like to live next door to this guy? You know, how would you like your sister to marry this guy? Well, I don't believe I'd want to live next door necessarily to President Nixon, but you know, I have a high respect for his international abilities and all. Like Barry Goldwater, you know, I'd love to live next door to him. I wouldn't mind if he married my sister. And you know, you wouldn't. And I've worked and spent a lot of time with President Reagan. Of all these presidents that I knew, I think Gerald Ford was the most honest to God, honest, straightforward, truthful person. I really liked him. He was a nice guy, and you know, as a Yale lawyer that finished at the top of his class, he was really a very bright person. And the press, some of them a bunch of prostitutes, I use that term loosely, they really gave him a hard time, which I think it all stemmed from some of the things Lyndon Johnson said about him. who, of course, Gerald Ford was Lyndon Johnson's opposition in the Congress at the time. These were some.
Bill, what do you see as some of the major issues facing medicine today? We've talked a little bit about government, third-party payers. You've been involved in many of the issues of your times. What are some of the major issues today?
Well, I think there are two or three things. Let me see if I can get them. This is in no particular order. I think this thing of AIDS is a critical issue in the care of AIDS, because these people with AIDS are drawn out into long illnesses that they invariably die from. Within 50 miles of where we're sitting right now, there are at least 500 people infected with the HIV virus. These people are all going to be slowly dying out there and want some kind of medical care. There's not enough doctors to go around to treat the people that are going to be dying from AIDS in the year 2000 in this country. There's just not enough to go around. This is a terrible thing that's facing us. What scares me about it is the number of people applying to med school has gone down dramatically. And I don't think it's down to the point yet that we are losing quality in our students, but I think this can happen in the future. And this is something we've got to watch after very carefully. What else is facing us? This thing of the economics of medicine. You know, if you know, you take a young physician that spends half of his life in school and training, you know, and this is the kind of person we want trained to treat people, and yet when they come out, they have to pay these vast amounts of money in professional liability or malpractice insurance, and this is, and then nobody really is satisfied with them making a lot of money. They don't want them to make as much money as an airline captain, for instance. And on top of this is the American people's insatiable appetite for medical care. No one wants too much medical care except for themselves, you know, just me. And they want everything done. And if you do everything for everything that comes up, just as we've talked about here at lunchtime, if you're going to get a scan on every strange headache, then that's going to cost a lot of money. I was on the first panel, or national panel for the containment of healthcare cost, which was put on by Boston University and then HEW in Washington. And the whole thing, the whole purpose of this conference, I found out, there were about 20 of us around the table, and I found out at the time that I was the only real practicing physician in the room. All the rest were insurance people, economic people, government people. I guess they wanted a token practitioner, so I was a token. But the whole purpose of this first thing, the first conference, national conference on containment of healthcare care was in Washington, was an effort to limit CT scanners, to limit how many, if they could come up with some idea or plan to limit the CT scanners, they could cut down on the cost of medicine. This was a rather cruel way to ration health care. And I think I helped turn that conference around because, you know, I pointed out to them that the first EKGs, I do an EKG for $35 in my office, the first EKGs done, you know, for cost would have been prohibitive. Same thing as CT scanners. You have to have a lot of them to drive the cost down. And then I pointed to those people there in Washington. It's all right, this for everybody else, but what about your own wife? What about your own child? Do you want these invasive procedures done in your brain, or do you want a simple CT scan done? Well, I think I brought them around, and we did not recommend the cessation of making CT scanners, as some of the people in the insurance industry and the government wanted to do at the time. So that may have been a little success on my part, I don't know.
Certainly the CT scanner is one of the more humane things that have ever been devised. Do you feel that HIV, the AIDS epidemic, is keeping people from going into medicine, and do you see a reluctance for people to take care of HIV-infected patients?
Oh yes, there is a reluctance. This HIV virus, mark my word, if someone's looking at this in the year 2000 or later on, you mark my word, HIV is going to be considered then much more contagious than it's considered now. The people that are considering it, oh, it's not very contagious now, they are either actually lying or they're stupid, because this thing is more contagious than people think it is, or people are saying it is right now. This is a very serious thing, and I think this has definitely affected the people that, you know, it used to be everybody wanted to go in internal medicine. I mean, these were the golden boys. These were the golden medical people, men and women. But what's happened to today, it's to the internal medical residents. They're not even filling their quotas in the country. They're not filling their quotas. And this, to me, is for one simple reason. The main reason being is that these are the people that are having to treat AIDS. And doctors may be giving some credits to what's being said by certain public health officials that are misleading this country about the contagiousness of AIDS. But deep down, a physician, this day and time, that knows the AIDS virus is still viable while it's sitting in a petri dish, dried in a room temperature for a week, and that virus is still viable, hell, you know that stuff is contagious. Man, it's more contagious than being said.
What about the reimbursement for taking care of HIV-infected patients and other chronic illnesses by primary care physicians being lower compared to reimbursement for procedures? Do you see that as an issue in medicine today?
It's always been an issue. You got to, you know, the joke among the profession is that if you want to really make money, you got to invade the body some way. And so primary care physicians, like interested family physicians, they on the low totem pole, low part of the totem pole when it comes to reimbursement. Now, there's a Harvard study been done recently that wants to change this around and turn it around. They said, well, we're going to cut down what these invaders, these people that do cataracts in 20 minutes, and the internist who does a physical in an hour, we're going to increase the primary care fees in the government and decrease these narrow specialty fees. Well, that's what they said. Now, and I say this in hindsight because I said it at the time. I said, what they're going to do, they're not going to increase the primary care fees. They're not going to increase any doctor's fees because they're not doctors and they don't understand the situation. And they're only going to split the profession and cut the fees of the narrow specialists. And that's what's turned out. This is what's come of that thing. It's come to pass just as I said. They cut the fees of the ophthalmologist and some of the radiologists and pathologists and things of this sort. But they are still not doing anything to help the people out there on the brunt of this thing of AIDS and the rest of medical care, like the internist and the family physicians. Of course, this reimbursement is, as you said, is most important, and this thing of AIDS is most important, and that's why not as many people are going to internal medicine now. If this keeps up, I don't know what the hell we're going to do, you know?
Bill, are you optimistic about the future of medicine?
Oh yes, I'm optimistic. You know, there are two kinds of people in this world: there's the optimist and the pessimist. And I'm an optimist. I am an optimistic. I've just written in this vein. I've just written the 1992 first alumni news cover story about just this problem. I am optimistic about the future of medicine because we are still the greatest profession in the world, you know. Nobody can, no other profession can approach the possibilities that we have. And what a fine profession we have, and I've talked on this before.
Well, that's great, Bill. Your optimism is certainly infectious. How are you spending most of your time today? I know that you're still active in practice and involved with your family, that you and your wife Jane have adopted Patrick, a grandson who's autistic, and you are quite active doing a little farming. Tell me a little bit about your present life, your routine in the day, a little bit about your family life and Jane and how you spend your time.
Well, you know, I'm 68 years old now, and in many ways I feel more vigorous and involved than I ever have in my life before. The great thing that's happened to Jane and myself and all our marriage is the adoption of our grandson Patrick. Patrick Hunter was born into this world with a problem of being, well, he was considered completely retarded and autistic when we adopted him at the age of 3 3/4 years. Patrick, since that time, with a lot of love and care by Jane and a lot of other things we're doing, not only has he learned to talk, but they figure he had normal IQ. He still has some problems, but he has come so far, and he is smart as heck. In fact, right now, he's ahead. I'm consumed with Patrick. He's ahead of the rest of his age group and in gymnastics, you know. And that's pretty good. And he's right in spelling all kinds of words. He's in a special class that we've arranged here in the county, that I arranged here in the county, through Dr. Schofler through my friend Dr. Ober, who via Dr. Schofler in from Chapel Hill. And they set up this pilot program in Pickens County, and he is doing well. He types his own name. He'll get in a computer soon. But Patrick is just another one. He's our 6th child. And my other grandchildren, of course, just as important, but they don't have the problem Patrick has, so it's like going after the one instead of the 99. These other grandchildren of mine, like Jane Hanahan, she's a anesthesia nurse up in North Carolina at Bowman Gray, and is doing real well, making a vast amount of money. My gosh! And her brother Ross Hanahan, he's in the gifted section of math, as his cousin Will. He's in the high gifted math and reading sections up in North Carolina at Asheville, and Carson is Carson Hanahan and Hunter Hanahan. These are beautiful little children, and we've got Patrick, of course, and Will and his cousin Trevor, who has just been born, who's going to be as handsome as Will, and we have the darling of our family, little Julia Hunter, who is my son, Dr. John Mark Hunter, and Melissa Hunter's child. And Julia's got a little brother on the way. I guess it's going to be a little brother.
Well, that's certainly inspiring, Bill, and I know that you continue to inspire people around the state with your articles and editorials about your experience with Patrick and other areas of life. Would you do it all over again?
You know, I've had so much fun in this life that I'm counting on having about 10 to 15 more years of fun, you know, God willing. And but I don't know that I would change anything, you know. I can't think of anything. I may have kept a little bit of care of my teeth, but other than that, I don't believe I'd have changed anything. I really enjoyed it all. Enjoyed my work with the Medical Association and the people in it.
Well, thank you, Bill. It's been a great pleasure doing this interview. I'm sorry because of problems on my part that taping has been interrupted a couple of times. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Dr. William Hunter.